What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion, no longer believes in the Ferrari project before the Canada GP? What if, even considering that it would be best to abandon the development of the current car? What does Hamilton know that the rest of the paddock is not seeing? The arrival of Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari was one of the most transcendental movements in the modern history of Formula One. There was talk of an alliance of legends, of a new chapter in the search for the 8th title of the British, and of a Ferrari that, with the impulse of a pilot of his caliber, could finally break a drought that already touches the 2 decades without titles. Everything pointed to a historic season. But that promise of greatness has begun to crumble faster than expected. From the first Grand Prix in Australia, the symptoms of a fracture in the story began to become evident. The SF25 showed worrying inconsistencies in long batches, and aerodynamic instability that not only affected performance, but forced Hamilton to modify his driving style more than he had imagined. Unlike his time in Mercedes, where the car was an extension of his body, here he found himself fighting a car that spoke to him in a language that still does not dominate at all. Already in Melbourne, his rhythm was discreet, with a lonely point as a prize for a complicated weekend, but the most disturbing was not the result itself, but what came later. Subsequently, Hamilton began to verbalize a technical concern that until then had been only a rumor within the paddock. He referred to the car as unpredictable, difficult to adjust, and showed that what he was seeing internally was not encouraging. To this were added the leaked reports from Maranello, where it was claimed that the SF25 had structural problems that went beyond aerodynamic. In other words, it was not an easily corrigible car. And that was when the alarm signal was lit. Hamilton suggested, indirectly but categorically, that perhaps the best option was to change the focus of development and start as soon as possible with the 2026 car of 2026. That statement, in the internal language of Formula One, is devastating. It means giving up, although not publicly, to the aspirations of the present. The most striking is not only the content of criticism, but the moment. Talking about development abandonment before even the 4th Grand Prix of the year is a pressure play, a signal of total distrust in the current technical structure. Hamilton is not simply throwing a criticism. He is conditioning the narrative of the whole season. If Ferrari does not respond in Canada, the story will already be written. This car was born badly and there is no way to save it. This beginning of doubts is not a simple problem of frustrated expectations. It is the first act of a possible fracture in the pilot-team relationship. And if something has taught us the recent history of F1 is that when trust is lost so early, the year can become unrecoverable. For Hamilton, the red dream has become, for the moment, a patience exam. And for Ferrari, the question is not whether they can improve the car, but if they can recover the confidence of their star pilot before it is too late. Internally, the SF25 has been defined as a bad car. It is not a media exaggeration or an isolated perception. It is a direct qualification that has emerged from the heart of Maranello, among the technicians themselves who work day by day with the car. When a Ferrari-like team reaches that point of brutal sincerity, we know that the problem is deep. This is not simply a car that needs adjustments. It is a failed concept. The technical disaster axis lies in the pull rod rear suspension, a system partially inherited from the SF24, but redesigned by the Enrico Cardiel address before its exit from the equipment. This component, far from providing stability, has become the origin of a chain of imbalances that affect every aspect of car's behavior. The theory behind this suspension sought to replicate one of the virtues of the SF24, the squat effect, that slight sinking of the rear train that allowed to optimize traction in curves and improve aerodynamic efficiency in a straight line. But what worked in 2024 has become a deadly trap in 2025. The new design has led the concept beyond its useful limit, sacrificing structural rigidity in search of a marginal aerodynamic benefit. The result? A car that breaks down under strong braking, which changes behavior between slow and fast curves, and generates a constant lack of confidence in the pilot. In a sport where precision is millimetric, this instability turns every return into a lottery. And here is the dilemma that Ferrari faces. This is not a component that can be corrected in the paddock between sessions. We are not talking about ailerons or barge boards that can be redesigned in the wind tunnel and replicated in weeks. The rear suspension is integrated into the structural concept of the car. Any significant change requires not only to redesign the component, but also modify the chassis, alter general geometry, and revalidate the entire dynamic system of the car. In other words, it is greater surgery, not a superficial intervention. In addition, the SF25 architecture has already shown not tolerate extreme changes without suffering side effects. In the preseason tests in Bahrain, Every attempt to modify the tuning to improve traction ended up compromising curve stability. And every time they tried to stabilize the rear axle, the aerodynamic efficiency of the car collapsed. It is an impossible balance, which forces engineers to choose the lesser evil in each race. This explains why the improvements that Ferrari is preparing before the Canada GP have generated skepticism. None of them directly addresses the root of the problem. There is talk of minor aerodynamic modifications, of adjustments in the flat background, of changes in brake cooling, even of slight adaptations in electronics to improve power delivery. But none of those solutions will attack what an inconsistent car really does to SF25. What this puts in perspective is the comparison with other teams. McLaren, for example, has built an aggressive evolution on an already solid base. His MCL39 does not need to reinvent himself every weekend because he was thought from the beginning with a stable and adaptable architecture. Ferrari, on the other hand, is trying to comply with a structure that was already born, and is doing it under the pressure of a championship that does not expect. Thus, SF25 becomes not only a technical problem, but a strategic warning. The entire development of the season now depends on a defective suspension that conditions each improvement. And when that is the starting point, any evolution will be just a more elegant way to waste time. What began as a technical questioning has become a crisis of trust between pilot and team. The relationship between Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari, barely nascent, has already entered a critical tension zone. And it is not just frustrations due to lack of results. What is brewing in Maranello is a strategic fracture, a vision difference on the present and future of the SF25 project. And that type of divergence in an environment as competitive as Formula One can be lethal. Hamilton arrived in Ferrari with a clear mission: return to the Scuderia to the world throne. It was not an impulsive decision. The British evaluated the technical potential, development projections, internal structure, and, of course, the long-term commitment of the equipment. But all that has been questioned in less than 3 months. The track reports, the simulation data, the feedback of the tests, and the real performance in the race have revealed a worrying pattern. Ferrari is not only behind McLaren and Red Bull, but also does not seem to have a clear direction on how to close that gap. Hamilton's words, measures but firm, point directly to Ferrari's technical dome. When a pilot of his caliber suggests that it is time to give up the development of the current car and start working in the 2026 model, he is not simply commenting. It is dictating an alternative strategic line. And that inevitably tension engineers who still believe in the potential of SF25. What should be a battle linked by the improvement of the car has become an internal debate on priorities, resources, and deadlines. Ferrari's recent history does not help. The team has lived multiple technical resets in the last decade, with constant leadership changes, restructuring in the Department of Aerodynamics, rotation of responsible and factory responsible. That lack of continuity has been one of the great weaknesses of the Scuderia, and now threatens to repeat itself. With Hamilton pressing for a change of approach, and with engineers trying to save the current concept, a dynamic that remembers the worst moments of Ferrari's recent past is being generated. The calendar does not offer truce. After Spain, the Canada Grand Prix becomes a kind of public trial for the improvements of the SF25. If the car does not show a clear evolution, not only the technical decisions will be questioned, but the narrative that Hamilton has begun to build will be reinforced, that this car is not worth it. And if that perception is installed in the pilot's mind and within the team, the domino effect will be inevitable. In addition, the situation is complicated with external pressure. The Italian media do not forgive, the sponsors demand results, and the tifosi who celebrated the arrival of Hamilton as a new golden era begin to show impatience. All this contributes to a thin environment, where each decision is magnified and each word is analyzed with magnifying glass. The case of SF25 is not just a technical crisis. It is a reflection of something deeper: Ferrari's eternal struggle to combine tradition with modernity, talent with structure, and ambition with reality. The arrival of Lewis Hamilton represented a bold bet for change, an external leadership search that shook the foundations of a team that has lived too much time trapped between the weight of its history and the inability to build a coherent future. But now that the heroic story has been beaten by the harsh reality of the track, we face fundamental questions. Can Ferrari adapt to the demands of a pilot who not only demands technical excellence, but also a clear vision of the future? Is the Scuderia prepared to put aside old mental structures and assume that it needs to reinvent itself from the depths of its DNA to be champion again? The SF25 is being more than a failed car. It is the mirror in which the distance between what Ferrari wants to be and what it is currently is reflected. A team that promises championships but delivers inconsistent cars. A team that celebrates star signings without guaranteeing the tools to succeed. A team that, despite having one of the most laureate pilots of all time, remains caught in a spiral of erratic decisions. And this is where the real danger is manifested. If Ferrari does not listen to Hamilton now, if he does not take his reading of the project seriously, he runs the risk not only of losing a season, but something much more valuable: the respect and credibility of those who have been called to guide them towards the top. Because Lewis not only demands results, it demands coherence, planning, a clear direction. And if he does not find it in Maranello, he will not hesitate to express his disenchantment, as he has already begun to do.